If you want to support this channel and help me make more content like this one, please go to patreon.com/4dvisual and pledge. I would like to thank the first Patreons of this channel, Matt Walla and Gilberto Riverol, I'm hoping I'm saying their names right, for making all this possible. Thank you very much. Hello and welcome to the continuation of the linear workflow tutorial for the interior scene. And today, as promised, I'm going to show you how to do post-production on this image for it to look much better. But before we do that, after I rendered this image, I noticed something that I didn't like. The floor here, in the original image we created in the 12 first tutorials, the floor was brown and you had like a texture here. But after we gone to linear workflow, the floor is too dark and the bump is too strong here. So I want to fix the floor texture in order for it to look good in linear workflow. So in order to do this, I'm going to open up in Photoshop the floor texture. This texture is will be in the descriptions below. So what I need to do is I need to add levels to this. I need to add contrast and a little less color because it's very red, and make it much brighter. So in order to do this, I'm going to add a Levels Modifier to this. So in Photoshop you have modifiers just like in 3D Studio Max. In order to add a modifier to this stack of layers, I'm going to go to this symbol here and I'm going to click on Levels. And now this will add a level tab on top of the background. So now whatever I do here will affect whatever is underneath it, just like the modifiers in 3D Studio Max. So if I want to make this much more contrasted, I'm going to take this level here in the center and I'm going to take it down to something like 0.75 maybe. I'm going to make it brighter using this dial here. So essentially this dial in the center is the contrast. If I take it down, the contrast will be lower. If I take it up, the contrast will be stronger. Now this dial here, the first one, is making the image brighter and darker. So if I take this cursor down or this value down, the image will be brighter. This cursor here makes the darker areas more dark, but leaves the brighter areas as they are. So this is a very simplistic way of explaining what this does, but just play with these three dials here to make this as contrasted as possible, but not too dark. So I'm going to make it brighter and make the contrast even more, so 0.6. Now this is very contrasted and very dark and very red. So I want to make it less saturated, less red, more black and white. So I'm going to add another modifier, and this modifier is hue saturation. Now in this modifier I can take the saturation down and make this much less saturated, so more black and white. So -100 is totally black and white. As you can see, no colors at all. -100. Okay, so that's not what we want, but something close to this, maybe -75. Now I'm going to add another modifier of brightness to this image of the floor. And I'm going to take the brightness up. So let's make it much brighter, like this. And let's go back to saturation. Make the saturation even more black and white, so -85, even -95. Alright, and let's go back to brightness and make this much brighter. So, in order to see how this image looks when we started using these modifiers, I'm going to open the History tab. And now you can see, if I make this bigger, all the things that I did since I opened the image. So if I want to see the image as it was in the beginning, I just click on this here. This is how the image looked at the beginning. And if I go to the last process we made, this is how it looks now. So as you can see, it's much more brown here and not so contrasted. So these areas here look very like these areas. When I go to what we did now, as you can see, these are much darker than these areas. So in the image in 3D Studio Max, the floor should look more contrasted, more differences in texture. So let's go back to Photoshop. I'm going to add another brightness modifier. I'm going to make it even brighter, 25, maybe even 50. No, this is too much, 30. And let's go back to levels, make it just a bit more contrasted. So I'm going to take this number here and just crank it up a little bit so it will be more contrasted, 25. And brightness up to 75. Okay, so the image was, if I go to history, like this, and now it's like this. More brightness. 1 second. These are the properties, the controls of these modifiers here. So if I'm in history, you can't see the properties. So you can just click here on properties, and let's take the brightness to its 100 full, like so. Okay, let's try saving this file, and let's see what we can do with it. So I'll save it in here. Save it wherever you want. Let's name it new floor tutorial 13 or 14 by now, and save it as a JPEG file. Hit save, and in the options, the largest file, because the size doesn't really matter. The JPEGs don't get that big, but the quality will be better. So always make sure the quality is on maximum 12. Let's hit OK. Let's go back to 3D Studio Max. Let's go to the material editor. Now the icons changed a little bit. That's because I upgraded to 3D Studio Max 2017. The main difference is how the icon looks, but essentially they're the same icons. So this material editor looks different in 2016, Max 2016, but it's the same editor, as you can see. So just look up where the material editor in your 3D Studio Max. It's supposed to be somewhere here. Okay, so now let's choose this floor here, and we can see that this is the material responsible for the floor because these sides lit up when I choose the floor. And let's go to the diffuse. This M represents the material. Go inside and change the bitmap from the one we used to the one we just saved, this one. As you can see, the texture changed, and it's, even without rendering, looks better. So let's try rendering it. Render production. Again, the icons are a little bit different if you're using Max 2016 or below. Just search for render production. Let's hit this. And I'm going to stop this now because I'm going to cancel, because I want to render only this part here. I want to see how the floor looks. So I'm going to use the region render and select this area here and hit render last. And now it will render only this area, which will make the render much faster. Let's make it a little bit bigger and see how it looks. As you can see the difference in the wood. So you have darker wood and brighter wood, and in the rendering we did, the scene looks good, but the wood itself looks a little bit just flat brown. So this material looks much better than the material before it. Now there's still a problem here that I don't like. As you can see, the bump is too strong in these points here. So I'm going to fix this. I just want the bump to affect these lines, the separating lines of the wood. So in order to do this, as I explained in previous tutorials, we need to create a bump map, which is a map that is with white and black. Black represents what's going to go down in the bump, and the white is what's going to go up. So if you have a black line here and everything is white, this black line will essentially be, will essentially be the bump. It will bump the black line down, so it will look like the wood is there is a separation between woods. So if I go to render setup, I want to open up frame buffer and show last vary frame buffer, which will show the last rendering we made. So this is a bump, so you can see that like the wood is bumping in. In order to create this effect, I'm going to create black lines. So I'm going to choose this pen tool. I'm going to make it smaller. The hardness is going to be the strongest because I want this pen tool to be very strong. And now let's collapse all this, just like in 3D Studio Max. Hit the right button on one of the modifiers and flatten image. So it will flatten everything to one layer. And now I want to create a new layer. So I'm going to hit on this page here. This will create a new layer, and in this layer I want to draw black lines. So as you can see, it draws for some reason orange lines. That's because there is orange here. So I'm going to change this to black. Now it's going to draw black lines. Control Z to delete what I just did. So I want to draw lines here, but the lines are too thick. So I want to draw a thinner line. So let's make this line thinner. Let's make it like 4, and let's try. Now if I draw, it will draw a line, but the line is not straight because it's very difficult to hold the mouse straight. So Control Z to delete this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use a helper. If I hit Shift and hold the Shift while I draw, just before the Shift, click on the left mouse button and hold it, then hit Shift on the keyboard and hold that, and just take the mouse to the right. It will draw the line in a straight line, doesn't matter where I go. Still drawing in a straight line. Alright? So now I want to draw from this line here. I'm going to hit the left mouse button, then Shift, and then just drag to the right. It will draw straight lines. Again, left click, Shift to the right. And I'm going to do this for all the separating lines in the wood. Like so. Now why am I clicking the left mouse button before the Shift? Because if I hit Shift now and then the left button, it will create a line, as you can see, of continuation. So it will continue from the last point that you hit. So let's Control Z, delete that. I don't want it to continue from the last point because it will create a line, horizontal line. So I'm going to left click to start a new line, Shift, drag to the left, to the right. Again. No, that's too high. Control Z to delete. Again. Now I'm not going to create these lines here because usually in real life the separation between one wood to another is very, very thin. You can almost not see it, but the separation between these two lines is thicker. So I'm going to create only these lines. I'm sorry, that's Control Z. Let's do that again. Holding Shift, remember, makes the lines go straight. So you don't have to be a wizard with the mouse. And again, and less 2. No, too high. And one more. And I'm going to create a small one here at the end, so the texture will continue on up here. Okay, so now after we created the lines, I want to hide this background layer here. And as you can see only the black lines. Now I'm going to create another layer. I'm going to take this layer, the new one, down so that the first layer, the black line layer, will be on top of the second layer, of the new one. So now in the new layer, I want to make everything white. So I'm going to click here, select white, pure white, and I'm going to make this tool the biggest I can, and just click once. So now you have in this layer, the new one, all white, and in this layer on the top you have the lines, and on the bottom you have the background that we're not going to use. So this map we'll use as a bump map. The blacks will go down, the white areas will go up, and you will have a bump effect like this. Alright, let's try this. I'm going to save it, save as, in the same directory that I saved the floor, JPEG file. Let's call this new floor tutorial 14 bump. Save and save. Now let's go back to 3D Studio Max and let's add this to the bump. So material editor, let's go to our material here. Let's make it bigger so we can see. As you can see, the bump here is very noisy. There's like a lot of noise in the image. So I'm going to go up to the wood floor. Let's go down here to maps, and in the bump map I'm going to right click, clear. Now the bump will disappear, so you don't have a bump on the image. And now I'm going to add the new bump, so go hit on none, bitmap, and let's select the new image. So this is this one. Let's select this and let's see. So now you have only the separating lines. You don't have this noise in the wood itself. So this is great. Let's try rendering this part again. And now you will see these lines, but no noise on the wood itself. Okay, so there's a little bit bump between the wood planks, and you can see the texture much better than before. So I'm going to use this floor texture instead of the one we used in the previous tutorial. Now the next step is the preparation for post-production. In order to prepare this scene for post-production in Photoshop, in order to make it look better after we final render it, we need to go to render setup and go to render elements. I need to add a couple of elements in V-Ray that will render with the final image that I'm going to use in Photoshop to make it pop more. So the render elements I'm going to use today, I'm just going to add the render elements, and we're going to talk about them after I render the image and start working in Photoshop. So I'm not going to explain now what they do, I'm going to explain in Photoshop. First one is V-Ray Global Illumination. Second one is V-Ray Specular. Third one, V-Ray Reflection. And Lighting, V-Ray Lighting. So Global Illumination, Specular, Reflection, Lighting. These are the most important in my line of work, because when I create post-production, I usually use these four. Some people use different ones. These are the ones I use. And the last one is extra texture. These I'm going to use in order to create the ambient occlusion for the scene. I'm going to explain what ambient occlusion is in the post-production in Photoshop. Now, in order for this texture to work, I need to do something else. I need to go to texture here, hit on none, and select V-Ray inside of maps. So I'm going to go to V-Ray. I'm going to select the V-Ray dirt texture. Now after I select this, I want to adjust it, so I'm going to go to material editor and hit and drag this to one of these windows here. It doesn't matter to which. Here, hit instance, because if I don't hit instance, if I just copy it, all the changes I'm going to make here won't affect the V-Ray dirt here. So I need to make sure it's on instance. Everything I will change here also on instance. So okay. Now I'm going to leave everything as is. This Viridirt material will make all the corners and things like that black and everything else white. So it will pop. I will use it in Photoshop later to show you how it's popping. So subdivision I'm going to take up to 16, but except that I'm going to leave everything as is. Alright, so these 5 are our render elements I'm going to use for the post-production of this scene here. And that's it. Just let's go to V-Ray, frame buffer, show less frame buffer, and hit render last. Now it will render the room with our new floor material, and if you hit here on RGB color, you will see all the elements we just added here in the render elements. They are here, so you can just flip between them. Now everything will be black because it didn't start rendering yet, but after it finishes rendering, all of these will be filled with the layers I'm going to use in Photoshop. So the next step will be to go to Photoshop and post-product this image here. Okay, so the image finished rendering, and now we have the final image before post-production, and we have all these layers, so global illumination and specular reflections, lighting and so on, and ambient occlusion and so on. So in order to save all of these layers, what I need to do is click on this disk here, click and hold, and this opens this sub-menu here, and I'm going to click Save All Image Channels to Separate Files. So these are the image channels. So in order to save them to separate files, let's make a new folder. And let's save them, let's call them raw. I'm going to save these images as TIF files. And the reason I'm going to do this is because I can, JPEG images are 8-bit color images. And I want to save the image as 16-bit colors. The bits are essentially the resolution of the colors in the image. Just like you have the resolution of the image itself, which is the points horizontally and vertically. Same thing essentially is with colors. When you do post-production things in Photoshop, you need to have more depth, more resolution of color in your image. In order to achieve this, I need 16-bit colors. So I'm going to save this as a 16-bit color image in TIF and hit OK. And now if I hit again, I can see that it saved all the channels for post-production. Now the last thing I want to do in 3D Studio Max before I go to Photoshop is, if I open the files I just saved, let's go to the folder that I just saved, we have here the Ambient Occlusion file. Now I'm going to use it in order to create Ambient Occlusion. I'm going to explain what Ambient Occlusion is in a couple of minutes, but for now you can see that the carpet is very dark. This is going to be a problem in post-production. I will show you why, but for now just trust me, this is going to be a problem. Now I want to delete only the carpet from this image. How do I do this? In order to do this, I'm going to have to create an alpha image. I'm going to create an image where only the carpet with all its hairs and everything is black and everything else is white. Okay, so in order to do this, I'm going to download a plugin. It's a very simple plugin. It's named Render Mask. I'm going to show you where to render this plugin in a second, but what you do is you select the object you want the alpha channel of, and after selecting the object you go to Render Mask and Render Mask. That's it. That's all you do. Now it's going to render only the carpet in white, pure white, everything else pure black. So in Photoshop you can select this carpet by using this map very easily. So now I'm going to save. I'm going to click and hold on these two diskettes because I need to choose only one disk. Because if I save it as two disks, it will save all the channels again, and I want to save only this channel, only the alpha that I created. So I'm going to select Save Current Channel, and let's name this alpha 1. Now alpha channels you can save as JPEG files, because you don't need the 16-bit channel depth, because it's only a mask to help Photoshop select something. So let's save it as alpha 1 JPG, large file, and OK. And before going to Photoshop, I want to show you where you can download this render mask plugin. So let's go to Google. Also the link to the download site will be in the descriptions below, but let's go to Google. Let's type render mask, and the first site that will pop up is the site that we need. Again, the link will be in the descriptions, so just hit download URL, and in this site you hit download. After downloading the file, just run the installation, specify what version of Max you have, and specify the root folder of the 3ds Max program. So in my case it's in C, program files, Autodesk 3D Studio Max 2017, and hit OK. So if you have 16, it's supposed to be in C, program files, Autodesk 3D Studio Max 16. Maybe you selected a different folder, but what you need to specify here is the folder for this plugin, and hit install. So I'm not going to do this because I already installed it. After you hit install, make sure before you do this, very important, close Max. So Max needs to be closed when you install this plugin. After that, just after you install the plugin, just go into Max, go to customize, customize user interface, and in main UI, make sure you're in toolbars, main UI, category all commands, and here you will find the render mask. Let's search for it, render REN render mask. So just click and hold this and drag it here. Once you drag it here, you will have this symbol that you can just click on and it will open. So that's it. Now let's delete this button because I already have one. So this is how you install the plugin. Okay, so now let's go to Photoshop and produce this image. So I'm going to open all the files that I just created. So we have the alpha channel that I just created, and raw color, extra texture, global illumination, lighting, reflection, and specular, all the channels that I created. I don't need this alpha because it's just a white, pure white, because we don't have like openings without background image in it. Just trust me, you don't need this. So except from this, open all the files, and we're going to work on this color. This is the base image, and on this base image we're going to add all these layers. So after I teach you what every layer does. So the first one is global illumination. What this layer does is, as I explained in previous tutorial, what global illumination is essentially when light hits something in the scene, it reflects a little bit of that energy to other things. So you don't have like complete dark areas like under the bed, because the light bounces from the floor to this area and you can still see a little bit of light. So this is essentially global illumination, and what this layer does is shows you only the global illumination in the image. So you don't see, like in the final image, all the direct lighting on the floor here and the direct lighting on the windows. You see only global illumination. Okay, so this is the V-Ray global illumination layer that we created. The next one is V-Ray lighting. This is the exact opposite. This shows you only the direct light in the image. So we have the yellowish light that is from this light here. In the back, if I hit F3 you can see it. In the back, in the entrance to the room, this light that hits the bed. You can see it here in the yellow because it's a yellow warm light. You can see the direct light on the floor and the direct light from the windows. So this is only V-ray lighting, only the direct lights in the scene are shown in this layer. The reflection layer is, as you can guess, only the reflections. So we have reflections on the wood here, we have the reflections on the floor, and the reflection of course in the window here, and the windows here. Next one is specular. Specular is like reflection, but for non-mirror like surfaces. So here you have the reflections that are like mirrors, like from glass or things like that. But the reflections from metal that are very shiny but they don't actually reflect like a mirror, like an image, are here in specular. You can see it's like a specular glare on the metal surfaces or on the wood surfaces. So this specular is like reflection, but more blurred out reflections. So we have reflection, specular, lighting, direct lighting, global illumination lighting, and the last one is extra texture. This is the dirt map. Essentially, in real life, in corners of things, dirt accumulates, and you have like connections of darker areas near the connections of objects. And even if it's not dirt, you have like darker areas near the wall when the curtain is near it and things like that. It just pops the image. Now everything is fine here, but this carpet pops the image too much. It will make the carpet very, very black, dark. You need to have all the other ambient occlusion in this image except the carpet. So we'll get to it. Okay, so let's start applying all the layers to this image here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit on this background layer. This is the layer organizer in Photoshop. So you have all the layers on the side here. Background layer, this is the main layer that we're using. So I'm going to copy it, right click, duplicate layer, and let's call this, double click to change the name. Let's call this background soft. The reason I'm calling it soft is because I'm going to use a modifier on this layer named soft light. This modifier list is a list of different approaches of this image being stacked on top of this one. Now this image is stacked on top of this image, so you can't see the image below. It's like two pages, one on top of the other, when the top page is not transparent. Now if I add a modifier, let's say screen here, it now adds one on top of the other using a screen method, which is it takes all the bright areas in the image and make them brighter. So you can use the screen method to put page on top of page or layer on top of layer, or multiplier method, which will does the exact opposite from screen. It takes all the darker areas in the image and makes them even darker. So in this instance I'm going to use the copy background layer with soft light modifier. So what this does, if I disable this, you can see it just creates more contrast, but it's too strong. We don't need its opacity to be 100%. We need to use this layer only 20% of it. So let's make it 20% soft background. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this global illumination layer here. I'm going to hit and hold shift button and just drag it here. Now what this does is drags this image, and because I hold the shift button, it places it exactly in the same place as this image beneath it. So now after we dragged it here, I'm going to right click, close this image. We don't need it anymore. And this layer is the global illumination layer. As you can see, it's placed, this eye is disable this layer and enable this layer. So when I enable it and disable it, you can see it's exactly placed exactly right, but we didn't use a modifier to stack it on top of the other images, so you can see only the top image, you can't see the bottom ones. So I'm going to rename this, double click to rename, GI soft. So global illumination soft. Again, why soft? Because I'm going to use the soft light modifier again. Now this is way too much. It creates like too much contrast, so I'm going to use only 20% here too. So if I use the history tool, I can see that this is the first image we started, this is the image now, so it's much more contrasted, but still too dark. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on the GI soft and duplicate layer. Let's call this GI screen. So this one, I'm going to use a screen modifier. Screen will make it lighter. So I'm going to use the screen modifier and I'm going to give it a strength of 30, not 20, because I want the image to be brighter. Now these values I'm giving to this image now, they change depending on the image. You need to be like, you need to have an artist look on the image. You don't need to be like a mathematician, just crank numbers like a computer. You need to know what you're doing. So these values, most of the cases I use between 20 opacity to 30 opacity. Now if I see that the image is too bright, I will make the GI screen 20. If it's too dark, sorry, 20. If it's too dark, I'm going to give it 30 because it will make it brighter. So use your head to calculate these numbers so that the image will look the best. In this case, I think that 20 soft in both cases to make it a little bit more contrasted because it has contrast already, and 30 for to make it brighter because the image is a little bit too dark is good. So the next thing I'm going to add is V-Ray lighting. So this is the direct light layer. Again, hold shift, drag it here, and let's close this image. And now let's call this lighting. And I'm going to add these lights to our image. In order to do this, I'm going to use the screen modifier again, because the screen modifier makes the image brighter. So this is the screen modifier. This is way too strong. Like we said, between 20 to 30, so I'm going to give it a 30. I think it's a little bit too bright. Let's give it a 25. And that's it. No, you know what? 30 was fine for now. I can change these values whenever I want, so it's not a problem. So I'm stacking photos one on top of the other using these methods, screen and soft lights, which essentially create like image on top of image with different modifiers on how to connect these images to one another, if that makes sense. So after the lighting is on screen on 30, I'm going to add the reflection to the scene because I want the reflections on the windows and on the bed to be stronger. So I'm going to take this reflection image and shift drag it here. Close this image, we don't need it. Let's call this reflection ref. And now if I apply screen modifier to it, you can see that the reflections become much stronger, as you can see here. They're way too strong on the bed and everything. It just it's like glass. So we need to make the reflections maybe 25. You can see when I enable and disable it, look at this part here. The reflections are still gaining a little bit of reflection, which is good. So let's leave it on 25. Last thing is specular, which is the glossy reflections. I'm going to shift drag this layer here. And let's call this spec for specular. And I'm going to give it a screen modifier again. So the areas that are specular will be brighter in the image, as you can see, this much brighter. So let's give it a value of, with specular you can give it just a little bit more of a 20 to 30, you can give it something like 50 is fine also, because it's a very subtle effect. You can see here. So this is fine, the reflections 25 is too strong, let's give it 20. I don't need that much reflection. Okay, after we connected all these layers that we created in 3D Studio Max, the last layer I'm going to add is this Ambient Occlusion layer. So let's shift drag this there. Let's close it. Now for this layer, let's call it AO, Ambient Occlusion. This is the most important in my eyes from all the layers because it gives a lot of depth to the image. Now the modifier I'm going to use in order to combine the ambient occlusion with the image is multiply, because what multiply will do is disregard all the white areas, they will stay the same, but the black areas will become darker depending on how black it is. So when I give it a multiply, look at the corners here. As you can see, the image becomes much more photorealistic. It has depth to it. It has black lines and things like that. But 100% is too much. Now, as I said before, when you apply this ambient occlusion, you can see that the carpet becomes way too dark. So that's why we created this alpha channel for the carpet. Now I'll show you how we use it in order for this ambient occlusion layer to disregard only the carpet area. So let's give it a value for now of 70. I think even less, maybe 50. Now, specular and ambient occlusion can be more than 30% here. Everything below that, I wouldn't recommend going over 30%. So reflection maximum opacity of 30, lighting, specular and all of that. But when you go, excuse me, not specular. When you go to specular and ambient occlusion, sometimes 50 is good, sometimes even more, sometimes a little bit less, but this is a very important layer, so I'm going to use it because you can see the wrinkles on the curtains when you use this, and this area here pops up. So this is a very important layer. I'm going to give it maybe even 60. Now in order for it to disregard the carpet, I need to add a mask to it. What a mask does, in order to add a mask, you go to the layer that you want to add the mask to, and you click here. This button is a mask button. It will add a mask here. Now, in order to go to mask view, you need to hold Alt and click on the mask. Now you see that the mask is pure white. What this says is everything that is pure white will be used. So everything in this ambient occlusion layer is now being used, including the carpet. Now if I want to something not to be used, I need to make it black. So the black areas in this mask will be disregarded. So all that is the black area in this mask will be disregarded from this image. So in order to do this, I'm going to go to alpha and I'm going to invert it. So I'm going to make the black white and the white black. So in order to do this, I'm going to hit Control I, invert. And now I'm going to take this image here. Now you know what? Let's take it back here. I'm going to copy it. So I'm going to use this tool here to rectangle marquee tool. So I'm going to select left click everything. Now it's selected everything in the image, and I'm going to hit Control C, so Control copy. Now let's go to our image here. I'm going to Alt click on the mask to go inside, and now Control V will paste that mask inside the mask. So now it will use from this channel everything that is white and not use what is in black here, which is our carpet. So if I go back to the image, you can see ambient occlusion works on everything, but the carpet is not affected at all. That's because it's the black area here. It is not affected. Now I want a little bit of this ambient occlusion effect on the carpet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click, duplicate this ambient occlusion layer. I'm going to call it ambient occlusion carpet. Alright, so now it doubled the ambient occlusion, but disregard this for a second. Now, what I want to do is ambient occlusion carpet to affect only the carpet and nothing else. So if you guessed, good for you. What you need to do is Alt click on the mask and Control I to invert it back. So now only the white areas will be affected, which is only the carpet. So this ambient occlusion affects everything except the carpet. This ambient occlusion, because of the mask, affects only the carpet and nothing else. So now I can just take the opacity down for the carpet only to like 10% or maybe 15. So now the carpet pops up a little bit, maybe 25 even, but not as much as everything else. So you have ambient occlusion for the room, which brings you these black connecting lines and these areas here, and you have ambient occlusion only for the carpet, which just pops the carpet up just a little bit. Alright, so the next thing, I'm going to go to zoom, right click fit on screen so we can see it fit on screen. Next thing I want to do is I want to make the carpet a little bit brighter. So in order to play with brightness in the image, I'm going to add a modifier from this stack here, which is called brightness contrast. This is the brightness modifier. Now, after I added it to the stack here, I can make the image brighter or darker. Now it makes the whole image brighter or darker. Let's give it a 0 for now. But what I want to do is make only the carpet bright or dark. In order to do this, I need to use mask again. So the mask is automatically created when you create a modifier from this list. In order to add the area that I want this brightness contrast to affect, I'm going to go to this ambient occlusion carpet, alt click on the mask. I'm going to select it using this tool of selection, Control C, and I'm going to go left click on this mask and Control V, and then I'm going to click on the symbol here, and that's it. So now all the changes I will make in the brightness will be applied only to the white areas, only to this, this white area, which is the carpet. So now if I make the brightness like 25, you can see that only the carpet is affected. So I can make the carpet as bright or as dark as I want. This is a great tool, this mask tool, because you can create very easily using this render mask plugin masks for everything you want in the image, like for this dress or for this pillow that you want to change the color of. And then you just go to Photoshop and apply this mask to a modifier, and you can change everything in the image separately, which is great. So we have brightness 30. I want to add a little bit more of ambient occlusion to this carpet, so let's make it 50. It's almost like this, almost 60, but it's fine. I'm going to make the brightness 40, maybe just a little bit brighter. Alright, so now that we are finished with these layers that we created in 3D Studio Max, I'm going to make just not many, but a few adjustments to the image to make it even better. So in order to do this, I'm going to add more modifier layers. So I'm going to add, the first one is curves. Curves adds contrast to the image. You can take points and pull them down and up and just create every possible contrast that you want in the image. Control Z to undo this. You know what, just drag this curves layer to the basket here and delete it. Or you can use curves with automatic control, so you have presets here. So I'm going to use the preset named linear contrast, which is a little bit of contrast. So as you can see, when I enable and disable it, it just gives the image just a little bit of contrast, which is great. So curves, it's the first one. And again, like everything in this stack of layers, you can make the opacity, the strength of this layer, more or less. You can make it only 50%, so it affects the image only in 50% of opacity, or 100%. So this is a great tool. You can just add layers and modifiers and make them as strong or as weak as you want. So the next one I'm going to add from the modifier list is levels, which is my favorite. What this does, it adds contrast also, but it does it in a very easy to manipulate way and easy to see what you're doing. So this value here is the contrast value. The higher this is, the more contrasted the image will be. The darker areas will be darker, the brighter areas will be, only the darker areas will be darker. So this cursor is for darker areas. So I'm going to give it just a small value of 5, so the darker areas will be a little bit darker. And this value is from for the bright areas in the image. So I'm going to take it down so the image will be brighter. So from 255 to 250. So this makes it a little bit brighter. 245, let's say. Okay. And this in the center is basically a combination of both of them. So if I take this up, it will make the image contrasted. If I take this down, less contrasted. So just leave it at 1. Now if I disable it, you can see what we did. So we just gave it a 245 and 5. And it just added a little bit to the image. Alright, so we have curves, levels. Now the next one I'm going to add, that I usually add, is color balance. This will balance the colors in the image. So if you want the image to be bluer, so I'm going to take this and it becomes blue. Alright. If I want to make it red, I'm going to take it up on the red. So now the image will be very red. Now, I'm applying these blue, red, green and all these colors on the midtones, which means on the middle between dark areas and bright areas. You can apply them only to the shadows in the image. So only the shadows down here will be blue. Not only the shadows, but mostly the shadows. Let's go to the brighter areas. If I go to highlights, which are the brighter areas in the image, and I make them red, so only the bright areas will be red and the dark areas here remain neutral. So in real life, the skylight enters through the windows, and the skylight is blue because you have a blue sky here, and you have a yellow light coming from this door back here, and the sun itself is yellowish. So in the brighter areas, I want the bright areas to be more yellow. So I'm going to go to highlights and go a little bit more yellow. So let's give it a value of 10. So these bright areas will be more yellow than the dark areas. Maybe 10 is too much. Let's give it 5. No, 7 in the middle. Now the dark areas, the shadows, are mostly affected by the blue sky. So I'm going to, in the shadow tone, give it more blue. So let's go to the blue, give it +5. Maybe too much, +3. So now if I disable and enable it, it's just a very subtle approach of yellow. Maybe let's give it a 5. Subtle blue and yellow colors. It almost doesn't change anything, but it's nice. I think it adds a little bit to the image. So this is before, a little bit bluish, and this is after when you have yellowish tint. Alright, so if I want to see the difference between before post-production and after, I can just go in the history tab all the way back here, and this is the image how it was in the beginning. So this is very bland, it looks not bad, but it's a little bit dark and not contrasted, not very interesting. Now after all we did, if I go here, you can see that we have very bright areas, and you have things just pop more. So this is before, this is after. You can clearly see the difference. Now the last thing I want to do is I'm going to click on, it doesn't matter which one of these layers, on the name of the layer, and flatten image. I want to flatten all the layers to one layer. The reason I'm doing this is because I want to add one more filter, and this filter is Sharpen Filter. I want to make this image sharper. So if I go into the image a little bit, zoom, I'm sorry, I will apply this filter and you will see the difference. So I'm going to go to Sharper, Unsharpen Mask, and now if I hit preview, you can see, look at this area here. You can see that clearly the difference in the hairs. It makes the image much more sharp. Now the amount is on 90, you can take it up or down the amount. 0 is nothing, 500 is like a maybe an Instagram filter or something, so it's too much. Let's go on 70 is fine, I think. So this is without, this is with, maybe 100, like so. So if I right click when I'm on zoom, fit on screen, let's see with a history tool, I'm going to go back before the enchantment mask. This is like this, and after. Just sharpens the image a little bit, which adds to it, I think. So this is the final image after post-production. Let's save it. Let's see the differences before, from the image before the post-production, image after, and the image from before we used the linear workflow from the first 12 tutorials. So let's save it as PP, post-production, JPG. I'm going to save it and make sure you're saving it on large because I want to preserve the quality on maximum. And if you want to save it as a PSD, as a Photoshop file, you just hit save as and as a Photoshop file. It's pretty important that you save the Photoshop file because if you want to make changes to it, but save it before you collapse the stack here. So before we hit flatten image, so you have all the layers to play with. So I'm going to save it as Photoshop file before I collapsed everything. And now the last thing we're going to do is we're going to see, let's close everything. And let me show you. No, wait 1 second. Okay. Let me show you the difference between the renderings. So post-production is from now, after post-production. This is the picture from the first 12 tutorials. And let's take the picture before post-production. Let's see the differences between all these three. So this is the image from the first 12 tutorials. This is the image from after post-production. So as you can see, in my eyes, it looks more professional and more realistic. You have a bluish tint to the image from the light coming from our exterior sources. You have more of a darker areas here. This is the image, marked darker areas here. It's sharper. Overall, I think the look and feel in this image from using the linear workflow looks just one step more realistic than before. So as you can see in the window areas, just looks better. Now this image is before the post-production and this is after. Just pops more, looks more professional. So thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next tutorial.